Hello, welcome back. We're going to get straight into another tactics session here. I have an alarm set in 20 minutes time, 19 minutes now almost, and that's because we got to get off to work. Life is always involving lots of work, including work on our chess. So let's get into this. Let's try and get this streak happening. We've got 20 minutes. The most obvious check in this position is to play Queen h2 and it's checkmate. So that's always nice. Now, we've been checked here, so we have to respond to the check. There's a couple ways that we can respond to a check in general. You can move the king. You can take the checking piece. In fact, when you're checked by a knight, that's all you can do. If you had been checked by, some other piece, then you might be able to intercept the check. But when it's a knight, those are really our only options. We can move the king or we can take the knight. Now, I would say of the two options, our most obvious is to take the knight. If that occurs, then he takes our bishop. We can take the bishop too. And then he can come here with a check. We then have to move the king anyway. And when we move the king, doesn't really matter where. But wherever we do move the king, he takes the rook here, but we can capture back, and I don't think he's going to be left with enough material to give a mate, so I'm pretty sure we can just take the knight. Let's just have another look at what happens after queen takes knight, if it's not going to be rook takes bishop. So after queen takes knight, what has he got there? He could go in with the immediate check with bishop g2, but then we drop the queen back to g2, capturing the bishop that's checking us. And, offering trades of queens. So that would be fine for us as well. Anything else he could do? He could play maybe rook f8, but then we just play rook takes rook. And I think things are looking pretty fine here. So again, if queen takes knight, rook takes bishop, queen takes bishop, and then his bishop takes on g2 with check, we would go to king g1, so that after he takes our rook, we can take the bishop. Then he can play queen h1 check, but then we just go to either f2 or e2, probably f2, so that he doesn't have the g2 square at his disposal. And I think that's it. He's run out of checks. So I'm being a bit safe there, but at least I've calculated a few things. All right, nice, exactly as we'd said. All right, in this position, we have a check. It doesn't look very sensible on its face, and that would be rook e2. I'm not drawing as many arrows today, you might have noticed. Rook e2 would be a check we could do. I'll draw the arrow there briefly. But he just takes it, probably with the queen. And what have we got really in terms of follow-up there? Maybe not a lot. So what else can we do? Since there is one other check, actually. There is another check. Can you see a check there? Can you see another check on the board? It doesn't involve moving a rook. It involves moving the queen. Indeed, it is queen h4 check. And this comes with a nice fork on the knight, which cannot be intercepted by the attacked knight. And since the queen can't be captured, the king's just going to have to move. So those are the only options when you're dealing with a check. Move the king, capture the checking piece, intercept the check. In this case, the only option is move the king, but the king can move to squares where it will guard the attacked piece. So that is worth knowing. Now we're going to calculate the rest of this variation without arrows. So queen h4 check. Now let's say king f3, where it still defends the knight. What do we play there? I mean, in that position, we could play rook e4. If you can imagine in that at the moment, if you look at the e4 square, it's a light square, and it's currently being viewed by white's light squared bishop. But if we play queen h4 and then he plays king f3, stepping onto the light square in front of his light squared bishop, he'll be blocking the light squared bishop's vision of the e4 square. So we could play queen h4, king f3, and then rook e4, threatening then to take the rook with take the knight, sorry, with checkmate. And it's very hard for him to do anything about that. He can move the knight away, but the only safe square for the knight in that case would be d5. And if he plays d5, well, that would be a legitimate, follow-up. We could then play queen h5 ourselves. That's a check as well. But I'm getting the distinct feeling that my variation has gone wrong. It can't be right. But I'll show you with arrows. So we go check, he comes here. If we come here, threatening the mate, he jumps the knight away to d5, where he still protects this square. Then if we drop the queen back with a check, well, he moves away. I don't really see the follow-up there for us. So that's why I'm saying I think this has probably gone wrong. But I still think this is going to be the right move. Just what would be the correct follow-up to f3? That's what we're considering. After queen h4, king f3, what's the follow-up? There is another check, and it would be knight e5 check. But the most obvious thing that would happen there is that the pawn would capture our knight. The pawn would just capture our knight, and I don't see why that should be any good for us at all. I've also just realized in the back of my mind, king f3 was one of two options, where the other option was king e3. But because of a placement of our rook on this nice e file, which is semi-open meaning it's not completely open, but we don't have a pawn here. It looks like our pawn's captured this way. It's only blocked by one pawn, so it's a semi-open file, as opposed to a fully open file, which this C file is fully open. Rooks tend to belong on open files, whether open or semi-open, better than, files where, you've got your own pawn and they've got a pawn as well. But that's a side note. After queen h4 check, he can't come here because our rook is correctly placed on a semi-open file, taking away this e3 square from him. So if he wants to defend the knight, he has to play king f3. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, what do we play there? Well, what if we follow up with a move like g5? Since we couldn't find a sensible check in that position, maybe we can, and also I can't see any sensible captures, maybe we can play a threatening move like g5, this pawn move, threatening the knight. In that case, not only are we threatening the knight, but once again, we're threatening queen takes knight with checkmate. So I think that in that case, the knight is going to have to move. And as mentioned earlier, well, I thought there was only one safe square for the knight, that being d5, but actually, I suppose there's also d3. So queen h4, king f3, g5, and then let's say the more stable square for the knight is d3. So let's say knight d3. Then we can actually push the pawn even further. We can push the g5 pawn up to g4 with check. If he plays h takes g4, we can play f takes g4 again with check. And that is very close to mate. Here he has to play king f4, and then we can play g3. We could play g3 if we want. This is, even though I haven't correctly calculated it, this one feels like this is the right way to go. And it doesn't actually matter if he had played knight d5 or knight d3 in response to g5. All right, so there's lots of letters and numbers I'm saying. Let's look at it on the board now. Okay. Queen h4 check. He has to defend the knight by playing this move. King f3. Then if we play g5, his knight's under attack, and we're also threatening not just to take the knight with the pawn, but to take with the queen would be checkmate. So he defends the knight by either of these two moves. Let's just say this one, where he defends the knight and also defends the potential checkmate square. But then we follow through with the pawn and we play g4. Check. Now, he can't move the king. He can't take. So he has to take with this pawn, literally forced. Then I was thinking we can take with this pawn, but now I think thinking about it again, we can take there with the queen. And that king now has to move. And the only square it can move to is back to f2, from whence it came. This is all looking really good. And of course, we could also, in that position with the queen on h4, we could also there take with, f takes g4 check. And again, he has to move. Well, he can't move this. Look, this is just, regardless, it's looking really good. That's why I'm happy to do it. After all, he didn't even play this. He just gives us the knight. So that took a long time, but this is an easy one. We've got a skewer, a check, which skewers the rook. But, it was interesting to see that as we were trying to calculate there, you could tell that in the first variations I was kind of slipping and it didn't feel like things were going the right way. Even though my calculations may not have been perfect, the sense was that's not quite right. And then even at the end, even though my calculations might not have been perfect, the sense was, yeah, this is the right way to go. So intuition actually matters in chess because you can't calculate everything. We're not computers. You do have to rely on instinct sometimes. Informed instinct and educated guesses. Now, the first most obvious check here is this one. You really have to wonder why not give this check. He's forced then to h6 or h5. h5 would be a disaster because then we take the pawn with check and we skewer the rook, just like in the previous example. So he'd probably be forced to h6 after we play rook g7. And at that point, how do we follow up? Well, there's no sensible checks there, I would say. No sensible checks, but we can make a threat against the rook. The rook there can simply move out of the... Oh, he can give us a check there. So let's just see, though. What else have we got? We do have this check, and then when he moves, although we can't really do a whole lot else, what we could do... No, we would be giving up our rook to come to g2. He would simply take. But what we could do after the check is start pushing this pawn, perhaps. So if we push this pawn, if he starts trying to go and get behind it, well, that might be a bit of a trouble for us. That might not be much fun. So, all right. So the check doesn't seem to lead anywhere after h6. Can we think of something after king h6? So we go rook g7 check, king h6. What next? What next? Well, then I suppose we could go rook g5. And the beauty of rook g5 is we are actually threatening mate. So I like that. That, again, feels a whole lot more right. It feels a lot more right than... Okay, two variations. One of them is to play this, and when he moves, we start pushing this pawn. That doesn't feel right because after he starts attacking the pawn, we got no way to defend it. That pawn's just going to get lost, and we're not making progress with the attack on his king. The other option is, after check and he moves, we drop the rook down to g5. And there, that feels right because his king actually cannot move anywhere. Can't take the rook because we're defended by the pawn. So his king is now immobile. And if we can deliver a check to the king, it's going to be mate. And we can deliver a check if we're given a move. We would play bishop g7, checkmate. And is there any way for him to stop that? That's all we need to look at now. So check, he comes here. Because if he comes here, we have a skewer where we take the pawn. He has to move the king. We take the rook, and then we're just a full rook up. We got an outside pass pawn, which is protected. We got no problems in that position at all. So no point actually calculating further. But check, and he comes here. We come here. We're threatening mate on bishop g7. How does he stop it? Well, he can't move the king, so that's out of the question. The light squared bishop has no chance of ever guarding the dark square up here. His pawns can't do it. Can his rook do it? No. Well, maybe his rook can come somewhere like this, or maybe he can give us some checks, but we move out of the way. And if he comes somewhere like this, well, again, we can just take that rook straight off the board, and even more so, we can just give the checkmate anyway. So this is it. It's actually a forced mate. Oh, in this case, he actually has come to this square. So we're not going to just blindly carry on with the plan because there he just moves out of the way and we've got nothing. But here we just win a rook and a pawn by playing check and then skewering the rook. Do we want to come back here first? Well, no. What's the point? All right, so it's taken us a while to get to 5 here, and we've only got another 5 minutes or so, I think, before my alarm goes off. But this is good. I'll need as much endgame practice as I can possibly get, because when you're playing in, I'm not going to say high-level games, because at my rating, I'm nowhere near proper high-level chess. But when you're playing just in games in general of decent quality, it's hard to make progress when there's no big blunders, and oftentimes, positions, both players find resources, and over many moves, pieces get traded. You just end up in an endgame where it might be relatively equal until someone makes a move that might seem innocuous, but actually it's a big blunder. So, in this position, it looks like, hey, we've both got kings, we've both got a bunch of pawns. What's going on? It doesn't immediately, at least to me, seem obvious that someone should be much better. But obviously this is a tactical puzzle. So someone, and it's black, is a lot better. We've got to figure out why. So that when we're in these positions, which we will be in the Canberra Chess Club tournament coming up, we're practiced in making the most of them. So let's follow our technique. We can start out by looking at the most obvious checks, which would be g5. If we play g5 and he simply just ignores and moves the king, well, then we take his pawn, he takes there. And I would say there, we're in a position to basically play king e3, and maybe not king e3 just yet. I was going to say start pushing our f pawn. And I think in general that feels pretty right, intuitively. We've got 2 pawns here versus 1. This one is an outside, not an outside. This one is a passed pawn. Very important, meaning there's no white pawns on the adjacent files. This one's not passed because there's a white pawn on an adjacent file. Same with this, it's got 2 adjacent white pawn files. Same with this, it's got an adjacent pawn. This one's got an adjacent pawn. But this one is unique in that there's no white pawns on the adjacent files. So it's passed any of the enemy pawns, and it's potentially got a clear path up here to queendom. So if we play something like this, and he comes here looking for this pawn, well, then we take here, and if he takes the pawn, well, then we're gonna queen. So we can't allow that. If he takes, and we take, and he takes, which is the most direct, easy thing to calculate, and he well could do that. What do we do then? Do we infiltrate with our king? He can't then push this pawn because we'd simply take it. He can't push this pawn. If we look at this again. And why am I actually looking at this move? Well, it's because it activates the king as much as possible, and it threatens to infiltrate with the king and start taking these pawns. So that's why I'm looking at that. So check, he takes, we take, he takes, we step here. What does he do? These pawns are immobile. If this pawn moves, we can take, or we could even take here. So basically that looks good. And if he takes and takes back, we can then take here. So that looks really good. We'd be threatening this. So that looks really good. If he moves this pawn, we simply take. And then this pawn is, also going to be doomed. So this all looks excellent. That all looks excellent, intuitively. If we play this, he can't go for this variation. Because we play this, and what is he going to do? Move the king? Well, yeah, if he moves the king, we come here. If he moves the king again, we come here. If he moves the king again, we come... Very good question. Very good question. Probably here. And if he takes here, then we come here. And then he starts pushing his pawn. We push this one. He pushes, we push, he pushes, we push, he pushes, we push. Get a queen. He gets a queen. Whew. I think there we can give a check. Okay, that's my alarm. So this is going to be the last puzzle. That's going to be the last puzzle. But I think that's probably right. That's still good for us. So after check, my point is if he takes and takes and takes, we should be fine. Whether it's this move or whether it's maybe something else, but I would say it would be this move. If, however, he goes after this pawn, well, then we do this, and like we said, he can't stop this from becoming a queen, so that's not going to work. If he comes here, take, take, well, that's also fine because we still have the same idea. He just has to now waste time going back to capture the other pawn. So it will be this move. And I'm just going to go back to that puzzle because let's finish here for today, but let's really squeeze a bit more learning out of this. I want to finish this game against the computer. That's what I want to do. So let's do it again. And then play with computer. Let's quickly finish this off against the computer. So we're playing against Stockfish. Okay, so he hasn't taken the pawn. Instead, he's guarding the infiltration square. Now, this is going to be difficult because it's Stockfish and chess is a hard game. But it shouldn't be impossible. Now, we have a massive asset in this position, and that's this outside pass pawn. Now, we already knew it was a pass pawn. It's outside because it's outside the bulk of these other pawns, and it's going to require the king to come far away from these other pawns in order to stop its advance. So what we could do is play g4 anyway, check, just to force the king to take and relinquish control of this square, at which point we jump into that square. Then he plays, let's try and do this without arrows. King f5, we go king d2, king e5, king takes c2, king d5, king takes b2, king takes c5, king takes b3, and then we have the pawn race with d4, a5, a4, d5, a3, d6, a2, d7, a1 queen, d8 queen, and then queen c1 check. He probably goes like somewhere. That's where my limit of calculation is, especially with the time limit. Maybe if I had more time, I could calculate it, but I don't have more time. And I can't see a better move at the moment. Like, these pawn moves don't seem to make any sense. This pawn can't move, and the king, I'm not going to move backwards with it, I don't think, although maybe I should consider moves like this. Let's say he takes the opposition, though. Then I can, there's no real point in doing that, so let's do this. Okay, now we're going to take the infiltration square. We can already see that computer says we're doing well here, but this is exactly what we were calculating. The king's now stepping across the 5th rank, and we're just going to take this pawn, and then we're going to take this pawn. I think this is the right pawn to take. Now that I'm thinking about it, maybe we can stop this whole pawn race scenario by taking this pawn. But then after he takes, we would have to come back here. He comes here. We come here. He takes this. We come here. That is the much, much better way to do it. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so we can see this works, and that's quite straightforward now. Very straightforward. Out of interest, had we gone for this, does it still work? It does, but it's a lot closer because, as we'll see, we both get queens. Oh no, maybe not. He didn't actually take the pawn. Okay, fine, don't take it. Well, that obviously makes life a lot easier as well. Alright, thank you for watching. There's, not sure if you can hear the sort of tree chainsaw or something going on in the background there. But, whatever. This is what I would do in, well, yeah, okay, we'll take that with check. We'll block him off from this rank, so he's just confined to this rank. Now we'll block him off so he has to come somewhere like this. He's got these 2 squares at his disposal. And now we would promote to a rook. Alright, thank you for watching. This streak is still going. So what are we up to on this streak? We were up to 6. We'll probably start another one next time just to start fresh, but we did a bit of training. That's all we can ask for. Time to go to work. Thanks for watching. Catch you guys soon. Cheers.